A man once had 3 children, all boys. When they had grown up to manhood, their father called them together. He said now he was very old and no longer able to provide even for himself. So he sent them away to get food and clothing. So they parted, and after a while they came to a large river. They got in a boat, and while crossing the river, the eldest son decided that when they reached the other side, they would separate. The eldest told the youngest to take the middle road. The middle son would go right, and he himself would go left. And in 1 year's time, they would come back to that spot to see what each had gotten. So they parted. And after a year, as agreed, they came back to the riverside. And the eldest asked the youngest what he had gotten. And the youngest son said, well, I have just a mirror. Oh, but it is full of power. So much so that when one looks inside, they can see any place in the country, no matter how far away. Then the eldest asked the middle son what he had gotten. And the middle son said, well, I have just a pair of sandals, but they are full of power too. So much so that when one puts them on, they can go any place in the country in one step. Then the eldest son said, well, I too have but literally small calabash of medicine. That is all. But let us look into the mirror to see how father fares. So the youngest son took out his mirror. They looked inside the mirror and it looked as if their father was already dead. And the funeral custom was finished. Then the eldest said, well, let us hasten home to see what we can do. So the middle son took out his sandal. They put their foot inside the sandal, and in one step, they were borne to their father's grave. Then the eldest son shook the medicine out of his bag and poured it over the grave. And immediately their father arose as if nothing had been the matter with him. Now, which one of these 3 sons has performed the best? Now, you know, most people are going to say that it was the eldest son because the eldest son sprinkled the medicine over the grave and brought him back to life. But that's not the reason. First of all, it's not the youngest son because the youngest son had a mirror where he could see any place in the world. But he didn't know that his father was dead. What's he been looking at? The middle son had the sandals. He could have put them on and taken one step to see his father dying. Then one more step to a doctor. Doc could have took one step and saved dad. So it's not the middle son because he had the sandals. It's not the youngest son because he had the mirror. But you see, it's the eldest son, not because of the medicine, because the story said when he sprinkled the medicine over the grave, his father arose. And you can't rise if you're dead. So he must have been alive, or the medicine would not have given him the strength to stand. So how did he come back to life? It was when the eldest son said, let us look into the mirror to see how father fares. Because the story is tied to an African proverb that goes, no one is truly dead unless they are forgotten. And that's why freedom stories are important. That's why Freedom Park is important. Because it's a story that needs to be told of a people that used to be on that land, and it is part of James City County's history, and it's part of a people's history, and it's part of our history that we must continue to tell their story. Many, many years ago in Angola, there lived a girl that had big, beautiful, large eyes. And whenever she would walk through the village square, her gaze was more than the young men could bear. On the summer she was to marry, a drought came over the region. The riverbeds turned to mud hills and the farmlands turned to dust. And it was her job each day to go out with a pitcher and find some mud from which to squeeze water from to provide water for her family. She did not have time to think of her new husband and the joy that they would share, because when one's mind is on food, they cannot think of anything, not even marriage. Well, one day, the girl with the large eyes was unsuccessful in finding some mud from which to squeeze water, and she was walking by the dust and she heard a voice. And she looked over, and up to the surface came a fish. And the fish said, give me your pitcher, and I will fill it with cool, clear water. She did not know what to do, so she gave him her pitcher, and out of his mouth spewed cool, clear water. She returned the water back home, and her family began to ask, oh, why did you get this water? Well, even when we did not have famine in the land, we could not find water so pure. Where did you get it? But she said nothing. She just gazed at them with her big, beautiful eyes. Every day she would go to the river, and every day this fish would give her this water. Well, the girl, she she became very fond of this fish. Well, his eyes were big and beautiful like hers, and his skin was the color of a rainbow on a clear day. She became so fond of the fish, but more importantly, the fish provided her with such pure water that on the 7th day, they were married. And they embraced. Now, the girl with the large eyes had a father who was a medicine man. Maybe he thought, oh, she has taken up with evil spirits, but maybe if we can find out where she's getting this water, then we can give it to all the people. So the next day he turned her brother into a fly and said, follow her to see where she is getting this water so we can give it to everyone. Her brother, now a fly, got into the pitcher and went with the girl with the large eyes. Well, after a while, he heard her call her husband. So he flew out and he saw a fish. Well, he watched them kiss. Oh, he heard them call each other husband and wife. He immediately flew back home to tell her father about this. Her father was outraged. Well, what will the people say? She's married a fish. They'll think our family's crazy. They have nothing to do with us. So the next day, he ordered her not to go to the riverbed. Instead, he and her brother went to the riverbed. And when they got there, they summoned to the fish. And when he came to the surface, they killed him. They brought him back and threw him at the feet of the girl with the large eyes and said, we have brought you your husband. She could not believe what they had done. His eyes were no longer big and beautiful. They grew cloudy. His skin no longer the color of a rainbow. It grew dull. She scooped up the fish and started walking back to the place where she had called her husband, thinking to herself, if they have killed my husband, will they not kill the child I am to bear? She started walking, and she walked until the water covered her head. But before she died, she gave birth to many, many children that can be seen on the riverbanks today as water lilies. That's a strange story, right? Nah, ain't no stranger than the 3 little pigs. Ain't no stranger than Goldilocks. You know, Goldilocks should be in the federal penitentiary. She knocked on the bear's door. Ain't nobody say come in. She broke into the house. That's breaking and entering. She ate up the food. That's theft. She tore up the furniture. That's vandalism. She jumped out the back door. That's a nice story. So you kids, you got to watch what you read. This ain't a strange story. It's a deep story. The girl married the fish for one reason. It was the water. What kind of water? It was pure. And when they asked her about it, she said nothing. The water in the story symbolizes love, because love can't be explained. There are no words to really explain, and everybody explains it differently. And so that's why she did that. But the father wanted the water to give to the people, but found out she married a fish. And he killed the fish. And the main reason he killed the fish, because the fish was different. And from the beginning of time till now, people have always thought something's wrong with being different. Different hair color, different religion, different color, different culture, where you're from, how you speak, southern drawl, all that stuff. Ain't nothing wrong with that. We're all different. And we need to learn and respect other people's differences. And the story teaches us at the end that there's some beauty that can come out of learning and respecting other people's differences. Let me see here now. There's a story about Titus. There's a story about the rabbit. There's a story about Anansi. I think I'll tell you a story about slave boy and the skeleton head. You see, there's a slave boy. Titus, he was a slave boy. He worked along with Brother Tom. Now, Brother Tom, he was a coachman. He worked for Robert Carter. That's Robert King Carter, the man with all the land and all the money. Well, he was a coachman, but that's not what he did best. See, what he did best was he was a doctor. He knew more about roots and nerves than anybody around here. In fact, he knew so much about roots and nerves to the governor at the time, he promised him his freedom if he would sit down and write the roots and nerves, or write down the cures that he knew with the roots and nerves. Well, when he told this to Tom got excited. He said, well, I know you're going to tell him. I know you're going to tell him to get your freedom, ain't you? When you going to tell him? He said, Tom, he said, let me tell you this story about the slave boy and skeleton head. He said, the slave boy was walking around one day, walking through the woods. He came upon a clearing and a skeleton head. Well, he looked at it, didn't pay it much mind, walked on by it, and he thought he heard it speak. So he went up to it, and the skeleton head said, mouth brought me here, and it's going to bring you too. Well, the slave boy, he ran home and he ran upstairs. He said, Master, come down there. The skeleton head down there talking. He said, ain't no such a thing. He said, yes, he is, Master. Come down there. He said, I go down there, but if he ain't, then I'm going to get you. So they went on down there and do clearing. And he said, there he is, Master. He's right there. He walked up to it. He said, hello, head. Head ain't say nothing. He said, wait, he gonna talk. Hello, head. Still didn't nothing. He said, wait. He said, hello, head. Speak, head, speak. And by that time, Master picked up a branch, hit him on the head, and threw the branch on in the water. Walked on back home, Master did. And as soon as he got out of sight, Skeleton Head said, see, I told you. The mouth brought me here. It's gonna bring you too. So you see here, Tom, you know, that story should teach you something. You don't say all you see, and you don't tell all you know. That's a good story. How come he ain't gonna tell to get his freedom? Well, during this time, especially the time when Freedom Park in the 18th, 19th century too, very few ways you could get your freedom. One is you would pay for it, you buy it, in other words. Other way, be left in a will. The owners would leave that freedom in a will. And the third way was meritorious service. If he wrote down the cures and roots and herbs, which in the 18th century, there's one specifically that gained his freedom for a roots and herbs to cure venereal disease. And he got his freedom. And so, but you know, the thing about it is that's some power. And freedom meant that you would have to leave the state in 30 days. So if you free and you got a family, that means the law say you have to leave. So freedom ain't always freedom. Freedom is sometimes what's family and what you can and can't do. And sometimes it's good to keep stuff up here rather than say. And so that's really the meaning of that story. A man and a woman once had 7 children, but these were not normal children. These children were made of wax. And the mother and father loved these children, but they couldn't understand why their children were made of wax. So they went up to the gods. They said, God, why can't we have normal children? You parents, you know what I'm saying? Hey, God, why can't I have normal children? But God only gives you what you can bear. So they just began to love their children because of who they were. And all of the children had accepted being a child of wax, except the eldest son. Every day, the eldest son would walk back and forth, mumbling to himself, until one day his sister said, brother, why do you pace like that every day? Every day you're back and forth, mumbling to his, what is wrong? He said, because we will never see the world. We have to stay in this house all the time. We'll never see the world. What does the sun look like when it comes up over the mountain? Huh? And what color are those flowers along the paths that we walk at night? We can't go outside during the day or we would melt. We have to stay in the house. We'll never see the world. Well, his sister understood what he was saying. Because being a child of wax, though, she thought was far better than being a normal child. Because they were made of wax, it means they would never die. There was nothing on the inside to get tired or worn out. And so they never get sick. If you were to cut off an arm, they would just push it back together because they were fully wax. And she thought that being able to live forever, never having pain, that was far better than being a normal child, but not the eldest son. Back and forth he paced until finally curiosity overtook him. He reached out, touched the doorknob, stood outside and slammed the door behind. And as he stood there, it felt as if his strength was going to the ground. But that was not his strength, for he had melted into a puddle. And when the mother and father came home, they saw the wax and they knew it was their child. And they brought him inside. And then they placed him on the table. And when the children looked at it, they looked at it, not knowing what to do. Then the father, he began to cry. And then the mother, she began to cry. Then the children of wax began to cry. This was the first time they had known pain. And then the next morning, the father took that wax into the village to a woman that molded wax. And the old woman looked at it, and she looked at it, and she shaped it into a bird. And then she gave it to the father, and after putting roots and bark from the trees to give it its all kinds of colors. And when the father brought the wax bird home, he placed it on the table, and the children looked at it, and they admired it. And then the father, he went and chipped out a little hole that was in the corner because the house that they lived in could not have any sun in it. But he chipped away so that a beam of light was in the house. And he took that wax bird and placed it upon the highest mountain. And all of the children looked through that beam to see the wax bird. And then the sun came up over the mountain, and the bird, and it shone through the bird. The bird turned red and yellow and blue and green, and its wings began to flap. And its wings flapped so quickly, the bird took off from the mountain, circled the hut 7 times, and flew straight into the sun. It was then the mother cried, the father cried, and the children of wax began to cry because they knew that their son and their brother was happy at last. Do you think you would have stepped out that door if you were that boy, that wax boy? Sure you would. Because when, you got to see the world, got to do all this stuff, sure, we'd do it. But there was a consequence. He was a wax bird. Waxes can't be out doing today or they'd melt. But he took a chance. And we sometimes take chances. But then he took it to the woman. Oh. Why didn't the children react when they saw the wax? The melted brother. The father cried, mother cried, then the children cried. Because this first time they had seen any kind of emotion. So now they're becoming a little human. Because they didn't know what to do. But how did they learn? They watched mother and father. So parents got to watch your kids. Because your kids are watching you. They know what hugging is. They know what love is. So they know what affection is because you're teaching them that kind of stuff. But the old woman didn't make him back into a boy. Why? Because when you make a mistake like that, you got to shape, mold. But what's the good thing about it? Had to kick it back out there. And then as a bird, he flew into the sun and he melted. He had to melt. He's a wax bird. So what happened? The story ended, but that ain't the end of the story. Because he would have melted if he flew into the sun. But then what would happen? You got to shape him, mold him, and kick back out there. So that's the meaning of the story, is that we got to always change. And we got to change as things change around us. And we got to shape, mold, and kick back out there. We don't give up. But we can't do it the same way we used to do it because things have changed. And so we got to change with those things too. And eventually we'll fly. And when we fly, what happens? Mama cry, children cry, daddy cry, because they'll learn and do right at last. Members don't get weary. Members don't get weary. Members don't get weary, for the work's almost done. So keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning, for the work's almost done. Brothers, don't get weary. Brothers, don't get weary. Brothers, don't get weary, for the work's almost done. So keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning, for the work's almost done. Sisters, don't get weary. Sisters, don't get weary. Sisters, don't get weary, for the work's almost done. So keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning, for the work's almost done. So keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and a-burning, for the work's almost done. Big Mama used to always sing that song. She loved that song. And Big Mama, I later learned why she sang that song so well. Matter of fact, I learned a lot of things. You see, Big Mama used to do some strange things. Way back when, Big Mama had this box, this little chest, this little box that she had. And if you open it up, she had a quilt in it. Every Sunday morning, Mama would open the box, take that quilt out, wash it, and she'd go to the far end of the property, find a tree, and hang that that quilt up on the tree. And then she'd go over close to the woods and I think she was doing some African stuff. She'd get on her knees and be wailing her hands and talk to the woods for like 5 minutes. There's some kind of praying thing she'd do every Sunday morning. Then she'd come home and start cooking. Because you see, Mama did the laundry in the big house. And Sunday, she had to do no laundry. So Sunday was a good day for her just to cook. And she'd come and she'd cook and cook and cook. And then just about halfway during the day, folks start showing up, knocking on the door. Because, see, on Sundays, slaves go visiting. And so we always had somebody come over to eat. Mama would always have an extra plate out. Folks would come out, and she'd always say that's my sister's cousin, or this my brother's wife's brother, and that kind of thing. There was always somebody there. She'd feed them. They'd laugh, they'd talk, and then she'd always give them something to eat. And, being a laundress, she always had some of the nice, fine clothes from the big house that got kind of bad. And she might give it to them, and then they'd be gone. And we'd be sitting there at the table one day, and the old church bell started ringing after somebody had just ate and left. And Big Mama, she started to cry. I said, Mama, why are you crying? She said, well, I always cry when the church bells ring. I said, why you cry when the church bells ring? She said, it's something in the blood. She said, it's something in the blood. I said, what you talking about, Mama? She said, she said, when I was a little girl, when I was about 3 or 4, I remember Papa, my mama's daddy, coming to me, and my mama's daddy picked me up, took me out, and put me on wagon. All I remember is being in all this hay, and the man giddy up this horse, and we was leaving, and he turned back and he said, love you, little sugar. Love you, little sugar. Turned back around. About that time, church bells started ringing. Later on, I come to learn as I got older that was the last time I ever saw my papa. That was a selling day, and that was the day I was sold. So whenever I hear them church bells ring, bring a tear to my eye, because I always go back to that time, and that's why I said, must be in the blood. I said, well, is that in my blood too, Mama? She said, I don't know, but it's sure in mine. And then she wiped a tear from my eye and left the cabin and went on out and got that quilt off the tree. And she come back, she folded it up and put it back in that old chest. I thought that was strange. Well, Big Mama, she went on. She went on to glory. And a year after her passing, I thought to myself, what could I do in honor of Big Mama? I know. I'll do that. I'll use that quilt. So I went over to that box and I opened it up and took the quilt out. I washed it like she would have did. Went out to the tree, hung it up on the branches out there. And I said, now what would she do? Oh, she'd sit here and she'd talk to the woods, do some kind of African stuff. So I started standing there, and as soon as I put my hands up, I looked around because I hear some noises. And I started seeing eyes peeping at me. And then one of them said, is this my brother's keeper? And I got kind of scared because there were so many people out there in the woods. And so I turned around and started running back to the quarter. Well, Master must have seen me because he running because he was getting ready for church. And so next thing you know, he didn't come downstairs and started ringing the bell. Folks started showing up from everywhere. He got his gun. He ran out there, and they started just pulling little black folks out the woods. They took them over to the blacksmith shop. Blacksmith started making chains for them and coffled them up and was going to take them to the jail. Runaways. And I sat there watching all of what was going on, and they started going to town, and they had to pass my quarter. And when they were walking by, one of them said, thought this was my brother's keeper. Another one said, I thought this is where the sun shines. And just about that time, heard them church bells ring. And I started thinking about all these strange things that Big Mama had told me about. And then almost every time that bell rang, so I started to understand. I had always wondered how come Big Mama always washed that quilt and used it so little. Well, when she hung up the quilt, that was to let folks know that this was a place to stop. And all them people that used to sit there and eat with us, they won't know brothers, sisters, and cousins and family. They was runaways. Mama would feed them and send them on. And when them church bells would ring, that meant that the white folks was coming away from church. And so she had to make sure that everybody was fed and gone before they come back from church. And that's why sometimes she said that's why them church bells is ringing them on to glory. Well, at first I thought it was some strange things like Big Mama used to do, but now I know better. But I started thinking, well, should I keep doing this because of Big Mama, or should I keep doing this to be my brother's keeper? Members don't get weary. Members don't get weary. Members don't get weary, for the work's almost done. So keep your lamp trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamp trimmed and a-burning. Keep your lamp trimmed and a-burning, for the work's almost done. People talk a lot about the Underground Railroad, but there are a lot of people along the Underground Railroad that made it possible. A lot of Quakers, a lot of common everyday folk, field hands, slaves that worked in the house, a lot of people. And the lesson of the story is that we all have to do our part in order that people can have their freedom, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's freedom to do whatever they want to do. It is our job, as freedom goes, to help other people become free. This is called The First Music, written by Dylan Pritchett. It's a book. In the very beginning, the animals just roamed around doing their own things. Cockatoo screeched, water buffalo bellowed, monkey chittered. Everyone did their own thing. One day, the elephant was walking around after it had rained, and he got a lot of clay on his toe. And then the sun came out, and it beat down on it, and it got harder and harder and harder, and it started pinching his toe, and he kicked it off. And he picked it up and he said, "Hey, what's this?" And he put it between his back paw and hit it with his front ones. Yeah, I kind of like that. The animals of the forest had never heard such a sound, and they started following the direction of the sound. And the first animal to show up was Miss Monkey in the tree. And Miss Monkey said, "Hey, what you doing down there?" And the elephant said, "Oh no, but I like it, I like it." And Miss Monkey said, "Hey, I like it too." And Miss Monkey started moving up and down. And as moving up and down, the leaves on the trees started rustling, making their own sound. So the elephant and monkey played and danced. The next animal to show up was a crocodile. You be a crocodile. Crocodile showed up like this. Cousin Crane came and landed on Crocodile's back. And the crane said, "Hey, look at monkey jumping up and down." And the crocodile said, "Yeah, look like fun. Sound like fun too." But as the crocodile was going from side to side, the talons on the crane started tickling Crocodile's back. And Crocodile started laughing, going, "Ha ha 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 ha." So the elephant, monkey, and crocodile played and danced. Can't hear you, crocodile. The next animal to show up was a giraffe. Giraffe showed up like this. And the giraffe said, "Hey, that don't sound bad. That don't sound bad, does it?" And the other giraffe said, "No, as a matter of fact, that sounds all right, all right, all right, all right." So the elephant, monkey, crocodile, giraffe played and danced. On the third day, they got louder. On the fifth day, they got louder. On the sixth day, they heard stop. They looked up, they said, hey, who's that? And the voice from above said, stop. You've been playing for 6 days, rest one. They went, whoa, we've been playing for 6 days. Don't feel like we've been playing for 6 days. But wait. We just have to rest 1 day. We can come back. Yeah, we don't have to stop. We can come back. I'm coming back. I'm gonna rest. I'm gonna rest tomorrow. Then I'm coming back. 7th day, I gotta rest. Then I come back on 8th. Okay. Hey, Miss Monkey, you coming back? Yeah, I'm coming back. Hey, Crocodile Crane, you come back? Hey, Giraffe, you come back? All right. That was the first time music was ever heard on Earth. Yay! But if you get the book, that's not the story in the book. That's what was first written. Because in the book, there's an animal. There's another animal, the frog. And the frog shows up and does nothing. And when they ask, why aren't you doing anything? The frogs have short arms and cannot play, short legs and cannot dance. There's nothing we can do but watch and listen. But something happens at the end of the story. And I ain't telling you, because you got to read the book.